It was a typical morning in the courthouse, with the usual buzz of people filling the hallways and the echo of footsteps bouncing off the cold, hard floors. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, but an unyielding approach to the law, sat at the front of the room. She was already reviewing the case file, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she scanned the documents before her. The courtroom was filled with familiar faces, lawyers, witnesses, and a few curious onlookers. In the center of it all, sitting nervously beside his lawyer, was a young boy. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the table in front of him. He was just a teenager, barely 16, yet today, he was about to say something that would change the lives of everyone in this room. Across from him sat the woman everyone believed to be his mother. She was in her late 30s, wearing a neat black dress and a serious expression. Her eyes darted nervously between the boy and the judge. She had no idea why they were in court. She hadn't seen her son in years, and yet here she was, summoned for a reason she couldn't understand. The whispers from the audience grew louder as the clock ticked closer to the moment when the boy would be called to the stand. No one knew what to expect, but something about the boy's nervous energy made everyone feel uneasy. It was as if he was hiding something big. The judge finally looked up from her papers and called the case to order. Her voice echoed through the room. "We will now hear from the boy, the witness in this case. Please approach the stand." The boy slowly stood up, his legs shaking beneath him. His lawyer gave him a reassuring pat on the back, but the boy didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on the ground as he walked toward the witness stand, the clicking of his shoes the only sound that filled the room. The audience went silent. Everyone was watching him closely, waiting for what he would say. The boy climbed into the chair, his hands gripping the edges of the stand as he tried to steady himself. His heart was racing, and every breath felt like a struggle. He had practiced this moment over and over in his mind, but now that it was real, it felt like everything was slipping out of his control. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she addressed him. "You may speak now. Tell us what you know." The boy took a deep breath. He looked up, meeting the eyes of the judge for the first time. The courtroom was holding its breath. His voice was soft at first, but as he spoke, it became stronger, more determined. I need to say something. It's important." The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The lawyers exchanged curious glances. The boy was acting strangely, and everyone in the room could feel the tension building. The audience leaned in, their eyes fixed on the young boy, who seemed like he was about to reveal something that no one had expected. "I know that all of you think you know the truth, but—" The boy paused, swallowing hard. He glanced at the woman who was sitting across from him, his mother, and for the first time, their eyes locked. The woman looked back at him, her face filled with confusion and fear. The boy's voice cracked, and the room fell into a deep, almost eerie silence. "The truth is, I'm not who you think I am." The audience stirred. What was he talking about? The woman's eyes widened in disbelief, and she instinctively looked to her lawyer, seeking some sort of explanation. The boy's lawyer seemed just as confused but remained silent, waiting for the boy to continue. The judge, who had been waiting for clarity, leaned forward, her expression one of impatience, but also curiosity. "What do you mean, boy? What truth are you talking about?" The boy hesitated for a moment, his hands shaking even more than before. He could feel the weight of the entire courtroom on his shoulders. This was his moment, the moment he had been building up to for weeks, even months, and yet it felt like he was about to break under the pressure. "Judge, I have to tell you the truth." He paused again, his voice barely above a whisper. You're my mother." The room went completely still. No one knew how to react. The woman who had been sitting there, stoically listening to everything that had been said, froze. Her mouth parted slightly, and she blinked rapidly, as if she couldn't quite process what the boy had just said. The audience looked between the two of them, trying to understand what was happening. The boy had just said something unbelievable. Impossible. How could this stranger be his mother? The woman sitting across from him hadn't seen him in years. She had no idea who he was. Everyone in the courtroom had been led to believe that this woman was his mother, but now, everything was being turned upside down. The judge sat back in her chair, stunned. She cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the situation. What? What do you mean by that? Are you saying this woman is your biological mother? The boy nodded, his hands gripping the edges of the stand even tighter. Yes, but she doesn't know. She never knew I existed. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, and the atmosphere became even more charged with tension. No one knew what to believe. No one knew what was really happening. The boy's words had opened a door to something much bigger, something no one was prepared for, something that would change everything. The judge, still stunned, looked from the boy to the woman and then back again. "This is highly irregular," she said, her voice steady but filled with disbelief. "We will need to investigate this further." But in that moment, it was clear that whatever happened next, nothing in that courtroom would ever be the same again. The courtroom was buzzing with confusion and disbelief. People were whispering under their breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The boy's shocking declaration had sent shockwaves through the room. "You're my mother." Those words echoed in the minds of everyone who had heard them. The woman across from him, who had been quietly sitting with a stern look on her face, was now staring at the boy with wide, unblinking eyes. Her hand shook as it rested on the table. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For a moment, she seemed frozen, as if she couldn't comprehend what the boy had just said. How could this be true? She had no idea who he was. Her whole life, she had believed that she was childless. The boy, still standing in front of the witness stand, felt a sense of dread washing over him. The truth had come out, and there was no turning back now. His palms were sweating, and his heart raced in his chest. It felt like everyone in the room was staring at him, waiting for an explanation. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. The judge, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief, cleared her throat and glanced at both the boy and the woman across from him. "This is highly unusual," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "Are you telling me this woman is your biological mother?" The boy nodded slowly, taking a deep breath before continuing, his voice softer this time. "Yes, she is, but she doesn't know me. She never did." The woman blinked rapidly, as if trying to force herself to wake up from a strange dream. She shifted in her seat, and her hands, still shaking, gripped the edge of the table. I don't understand," she finally managed to say. Her voice wavered with uncertainty. "How is that possible? I don't know you. I've never seen you before in my life." The boy hesitated. His throat was tight, and he felt like his words were stuck. But this was the moment. He had to explain. He had to reveal everything. "Please," he said, his voice growing more emotional. "I know this sounds crazy, but it's the truth. I've been looking for you my whole life, and I never knew where to start." The audience in the courtroom could feel the weight of his words. The silence was deafening as the crowd waited for what would come next. The boy's lawyer stood up and walked over to the witness stand, taking a deep breath before addressing the judge. "Your Honor, may I request a brief recess to present some important documents that will confirm what the boy is saying?" The judge nodded, still unsure of what to make of the situation. She gestured toward the courtroom door. "Yes, we'll take a recess. 10 minutes. This is a lot to process." As the room began to empty out for the short break, the woman stood up slowly, her face pale, and walked towards the back of the courtroom. She was shaking, and her mind was spinning. Nothing made sense. Could this really be her son? How was it even possible? The boy, still standing at the witness stand, couldn't move. He watched the woman leave, his heart sinking. He hadn't expected her to react this way, but he couldn't blame her. After all, how could she believe something so unbelievable? How could she trust him? After the recess, the boy's lawyer returned to the front, holding a file of documents in his hand. The courtroom was slowly filling back in, the murmurs and whispers continuing as everyone found their seats. When the judge called the room to order once more, the boy's lawyer stepped forward. He held up the papers in his hands and addressed the court. "These are adoption records," he said, his voice steady, yet filled with a kind of sorrow. "They confirm that the boy was born to the woman sitting here, and they confirm that she was forced to give him up when he was just a baby." The woman, still standing at the back, gasped. She slowly made her way back to her seat, her face pale and her hands trembling. Her mind raced. She remembered the day years ago when she had been forced to make a decision, one that had haunted her ever since. It was a decision she had never wanted to make, a decision that had changed the course of her life forever. The judge, seeing the woman's shock, gestured for her to sit down. She then turned to the lawyer. "Please, explain. What exactly are these records saying?" The lawyer stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with sadness. "These records show that when the boy was born, he was taken from his biological mother due to a tragic accident. His mother was seriously injured and was not able to care for him. At the time, the authorities assumed the woman could never be able to care for a child. He was placed into foster care immediately, and she was never told he survived." The woman's face went white. She reached out and grabbed the edge of the table for support, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "No, that's not true. I didn't know. I didn't know he was alive." Her voice broke as the truth started to sink in. The boy's eyes filled with tears as he watched the woman. He could see the pain in her eyes, the disbelief. He had always wanted to know her, always dreamed of finding her. But now, seeing her face to face, he wasn't sure how to feel. He had spent so many years feeling abandoned and alone, but now, here she was, right in front of him. She was his mother, and yet, she had no idea who he was. "This is impossible," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "Why didn't anyone tell me? I never knew." The boy's lawyer stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It wasn't anyone's fault. The records show there was a lot of confusion. The doctors believed you would never recover. The boy was taken from you in the most difficult circumstances, and no one knew you would survive." The room was silent as the woman absorbed this information. She looked at the boy, her eyes filled with a mix of shock, guilt, and overwhelming sorrow. She had never known. She had been told her baby had died. And now, standing before her was the child she had lost all those years ago, grown up and looking for her. The boy, feeling the weight of the situation, wiped a tear from his eye. "I just wanted to know you," he said quietly. "I didn't know what happened. I didn't know if you were still alive. But I had to find you." The woman, still in disbelief, reached out slowly and touched his hand. "I didn't know. I never knew. But I'm here now," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm so sorry." And for the first time in years, the boy felt like he wasn't alone anymore. The truth had come out, but with it came a flood of emotions. Guilt, sorrow, but also something else. Hope. It wasn't too late. The journey wasn't over. The reunion, though filled with pain, was just the beginning. The courtroom, filled with an overwhelming silence, could only witness what was unfolding, the hidden truth, the painful reunion, and the start of something that no one had expected. "You said." The tension in the courtroom was so thick that it felt like the very air had changed. No one could speak. The silence was deafening. All eyes were locked on the boy and the woman who, for so many years, had been separated by fate, yet now stood in the same room. The woman, who had been a stranger to him for his entire life, was sitting just feet away, and the boy could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The audience sat motionless, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath. How could this be real? How could a mother and son, after so many years apart, be reunited in a courtroom under such impossible circumstances? And yet, Here they were, staring at each other as the truth began to unravel before their very eyes. The woman, still sitting at the defendant's table, looked as though she were in a trance. She hadn't moved since the lawyer had revealed the adoption records. She looked at the boy, her face pale, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. The idea that this young man, sitting just a few feet away, was her long-lost son seemed too much to grasp. How could he be? And if he was, then how could everything that had happened be explained? Her thoughts were racing, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had been told that her baby had died, that she had lost him in a terrible accident. She had grieved for years, never knowing the truth. And now, sitting before her, was the boy she had lost, all grown up and ready to confront the truth that had been buried for so long. But the most shocking part, the boy was looking at her, his face filled with a deep, raw emotion she couldn't quite place. There was pain in his eyes, but there was something else too, hope. Hope that had been crushed and shattered over the years. But now, in this moment, hope was beginning to grow again. The judge, still stunned by the new turn of events, leaned forward and adjusted her glasses, as if trying to refocus. She had seen many difficult cases in her career, but this one was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The mother, the boy, the lawyers, and the spectators in the courtroom were all caught in this tangled web of fate. No one knew where this would lead. Finally, the silence was broken by the boy's lawyer, who stood and made his way to the front of the courtroom, holding a file in his hands. His voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "Your Honor, I request permission to present further documentation that will clarify the boy's true identity and the events that led to his adoption." The judge nodded, still somewhat dazed by the gravity of the situation. "Proceed," she said softly. The boy's lawyer opened the file and placed a series of photographs on the table, carefully organizing them for the court to see. The room grew even quieter as the images were passed around. The first photograph was a family portrait of a woman holding a baby in her arms, her face warm with a smile that spoke of hope. In the next photo, the same woman, much younger, stood next to a hospital bed, her face pale and exhausted, her eyes filled with sorrow. The boy's lawyer addressed the court. These photographs were taken at the hospital just days before the boy was taken from his biological mother. The woman in these photos is the same person sitting here in the courtroom today. He pointed to the woman across the room, still sitting frozen, her hands clutched tightly together. She was forced to give up her son due to medical complications and an accident that left her unable to care for him. The woman's face contorted with emotion as she looked at the photographs. It was clear from her expression that the memories they stirred were far from pleasant. She had tried to block them out for so long, but now, in the presence of the boy she had lost, everything came flooding back. The memory of the accident, the pain, the sense of helplessness, and above all, the day she had been told her baby had died. She turned her gaze back to the boy, her voice a whisper. "I didn't know. I didn't know it was you." Her words were laced with disbelief. "I thought you were gone." The boy looked at her with sadness in his eyes, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I thought you left me. I grew up feeling abandoned, never knowing why. I didn't understand why you didn't want me." Tears began to well up in the woman's eyes as she struggled to speak. "I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to lose you. I thought I had no choice, and I was told you died. I thought you were gone forever." The tension in the courtroom was so thick that it felt like the very air had changed. No one could speak. The silence was deafening. All eyes were locked on the boy and the woman who, for so many years, had been separated by fate, yet now stood in the same room. The woman, who had been a stranger to him for his entire life, was sitting just feet away, and the boy could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The audience sat motionless, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath. How could this be real? How could a mother and son, after so many years apart, be reunited in a courtroom under such impossible circumstances? And yet here they were, staring at each other as the truth began to unravel before their very eyes. The woman, still sitting at the defendant's table, looked as though she were in a trance. She hadn't moved since the lawyer had revealed the adoption records. She looked at the boy, her face pale, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. The idea that this young man, sitting just a few feet away, was her long-lost son seemed too much to grasp. How could he be? And if he was, then how could everything that had happened be explained? Her thoughts were racing, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had been told that her baby had died, that she had lost him in a terrible accident. She had grieved for years, never knowing the truth. And now, sitting before her, was the boy she had lost, all grown up and ready to confront the truth that had been buried for so long. But the most shocking part, the boy was looking at her, his face filled with a deep, raw emotion she couldn't quite place. There was pain in his eyes, but there was something else too, hope. Hope that had been crushed and shattered over the years. But now, in this moment, hope was beginning to grow again. The judge, still stunned by the new turn of events, leaned forward and adjusted her glasses, as if trying to refocus. She had seen many difficult cases in her career, but this one was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The mother, the boy, the lawyers, and the spectators in the courtroom were all caught in this tangled web of fate. No one knew where this would lead. Finally, the silence was broken by the boy's lawyer, who stood and made his way to the front of the courtroom, holding a file in his hands. His voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "Your Honor, I request permission to present further documentation that will clarify the boy's true identity and the events that led to his adoption." The judge nodded, still somewhat dazed by the gravity of the situation. "Proceed," she said softly. The boy's lawyer opened the file and placed a series of photographs on the table, carefully organizing them for the court to see. The room grew even quieter as the images were passed around. The first photograph was a family portrait of a woman holding a baby in her arms, her face warm with a smile that spoke of hope. In the next photo, the same woman, much younger, stood next to a hospital bed, her face pale and exhausted, her eyes filled with sorrow. The boy's lawyer addressed the court. These photographs were taken at the hospital just days before the boy was taken from his biological mother. The woman in these photos is the same person sitting here in the courtroom today. He pointed to the woman across the room, still sitting frozen, her hands clutched tightly together. She was forced to give up her son due to medical complications and an accident that left her unable to care for him. The woman's face contorted with emotion as she looked at the photographs. It was clear from her expression that the memories they stirred were far from pleasant. She had tried to block them out for so long, but now, in the presence of the boy she had lost, everything came flooding back. The memory of the accident, the pain, the sense of helplessness, and above all, the day she had been told her baby had died. She turned her gaze back to the boy, her voice a whisper. "I didn't know. I didn't know it was you." Her words were laced with disbelief. "I thought you were gone." The boy looked at her with sadness in his eyes, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I thought you left me. I grew up feeling abandoned, never knowing why. I didn't understand why you didn't want me." Tears began to well up in the woman's eyes as she struggled to speak. "I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to lose you. I thought I had no choice, and I was told you died. I thought you were gone forever." The courtroom was still. Even after the boy's shocking confession and the mother's emotional reaction, it felt like the story wasn't fully told. Everyone had heard the boy say, "You're my mother." They had seen the woman's tearful confusion and the lawyer's documents. But there were still many unanswered questions. How did they end up here? What had really happened all those years ago? The judge leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. "Before we move forward," she said in a calm, steady voice, "I want to understand the full story. I want to know what happened from the beginning. The truth." The boy's lawyer stood once again, holding a thin folder in his hand. He looked over at the boy, then at the woman, the mother, before turning to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "what happened between this mother and her son is a story full of pain, confusion, and mistakes that were never meant to happen. It all began 16 years ago." The courtroom fell into silence again. Everyone leaned forward just a little, curious and emotional, as if preparing themselves for the truth that had been buried for so long. Flashback. 16 years ago. It was raining that night. Heavy raindrops slammed against the hospital windows, and thunder rolled in the distance. Inside a small hospital room, a young woman lay in a bed, barely conscious. Her face was pale, and her body weak. Machines beeped beside her, tracking her heartbeat and breathing. That woman was the same one now sitting in court, only much younger, frightened and fragile. She had just given birth to a baby boy, but something had gone terribly wrong. There were complications during the delivery. She had lost too much blood, and her body had gone into shock. Doctors rushed to save her life. For hours, she drifted in and out of consciousness. She didn't see her baby. She didn't hear his first cry. She didn't even get to hold him. Outside the hospital room, a group of doctors stood together, discussing the situation. One of them held the newborn boy, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Another doctor, reading from a chart, said something that would change the baby's life forever. "She might not survive. She's slipping in and out. There's no family listed. The baby has no one to take him home." The social worker standing nearby made a decision. It was a rushed one, an emotional one, but she believed she was doing the right thing. "The baby needs a stable environment. We'll place him into emergency foster care. If the mother recovers, we'll figure things out." But the message never reached the mother. When she finally woke up 2 days later, weak and confused, she asked about her baby. The nurse looked at her with a kind but serious face. "I'm sorry. There was a problem. There was an incident during the night. The baby didn't make it." And just like that, her world fell apart. She screamed. She cried for hours. She refused to believe it. But the papers were signed. The file was closed. The hospital reported the baby as deceased. In truth, the baby had already been handed over to the state. He was alive. But the system had failed them both. Back to the present. The lawyer looked around the courtroom, his voice quieter now. She was told her baby had died. She grieved for a child she believed she had lost forever. But the baby was alive. And he grew up in foster care, never knowing where he came from, never knowing the truth. The mother sat frozen in her chair. Her hands covered her face, and silent tears streamed down her cheeks. It was all coming back to her, the hospital, the pain, the confusion, and the deep emptiness that never left her. The boy sat silently, listening to a story he had never fully known. He had been told he was abandoned, unwanted. But now, the truth was different. His mother had never abandoned him. She had been lied to. They had both been victims of a terrible mistake. The judge looked shocked but composed. "Is there proof of this?" she asked. The lawyer nodded and held up the hospital documents. "We have records, hospital notes, caseworker files. It's all here. It took years to piece it together. But the truth is now clear. This woman is his biological mother, and neither of them knew the truth until now." The mother finally lifted her head. Her eyes met the boy's. There was a look in her face that words couldn't explain. Pain, love, regret, and hope. "I remember now," she whispered. "That night. The storm. The doctors. I never saw you. They said you were gone. And I believed them. I had no reason not to. I lived all these years thinking I had lost you forever." The boy wiped away a tear from his cheek. "I lived all these years thinking you didn't want me." The courtroom was silent again. The emotional weight of the story had touched everyone in the room. Some were crying quietly. Others just looked down, unsure of how to react to something so deeply tragic and powerful. A man in the audience whispered, "How could something like this happen? Another person said softly, "They lost everything because of a mistake." But inside that pain, something else was growing. A new understanding, a new connection, a chance to start again. The judge leaned forward, her voice now filled with emotion. "What happened to this family is heartbreaking. But now that the truth is out, the question is, what happens next?" And that's when everyone looked again at the boy and his mother. Two people who had been strangers just moments ago. Two lives torn apart by a misunderstanding, now brought together again by truth. It was clear that the damage was deep. The years they lost could never be brought back. But maybe, just maybe, something new could begin. And this, they all knew, was just the beginning of that journey. The truth had finally been revealed. The courtroom, once full of tension and confusion, was now drowning in emotion. People who had come to watch a legal case unfold had witnessed something far more powerful: a mother and son, torn apart by tragedy and lies, reunited by fate. The boy sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, still trying to process everything he had heard. Just an hour ago, he had come here to speak the truth. But deep inside, he had feared that no one would believe him, especially not her. And yet now she was sitting just a few feet away. His mother, his real mother. No longer a stranger, no longer a mystery. Across the room, the woman, the mother who had believed for 16 long years that her child had died, was completely broken. Her hands trembled. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. But despite the pain, there was a quiet hope building in her heart, a small flame that hadn't existed before today. She had lost him once, and now she had been given a second chance. The judge, deeply moved by the events that had unfolded, gave them a moment of silence before speaking. "This is not something the court sees every day," she said softly, looking between the mother and son. "I cannot imagine the pain both of you have carried for all these years. But sometimes life gives us moments to heal, if we choose to take them." There were no more legal arguments, no more papers to sign. The facts had been proven. The truth was known. What remained now was human, emotional, beyond any law or system. The boy looked over at his mother again. He had waited so long to see her, to know her, but now he was afraid. Afraid of what she would say. Afraid that, even though the truth had brought them together, the years apart had built a wall too high to break down. She stood up slowly. Her legs were shaky, her breathing uneven, but her eyes were focused only on him. She walked toward the witness stand, not as a defendant, not as a witness, but as a mother. Everyone watched silently. The bailiff stepped aside. Even the judge remained quiet. When she finally reached him, she stood still for a moment, unsure of what to say. Her voice was soft, almost broken. "I don't know where to start," she whispered. "I don't know how to ask for your forgiveness." The boy looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain, but also with understanding. "You don't have to," he said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." She knelt in front of him, tears falling freely now. "I thought you were gone. I cried for you every night. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single second." The boy's lips trembled. For years he had imagined this moment, sometimes with anger, sometimes with hope, but he had never imagined it would feel like this. He leaned forward, and without saying another word, he wrapped his arms around her. The entire courtroom watched as mother and son embraced, not with words, but with hearts wide open. They held each other tightly, as if afraid to let go again. As if this hug could somehow take back the 16 years they had lost. People in the audience were wiping away tears. Even the court staff had lowered their heads, quietly moved by the reunion in front of them. The pain was real, but so was the love. And in that moment, love was stronger. After a while, the mother pulled back slightly, still holding his hands in hers. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly. "I don't know if we can ever make up for the time we lost. But I want to try. I want to be in your life, If you'll let me. The boy nodded slowly. I've waited my whole life to hear you say that. They sat side by side, no longer strangers. The judge looked at them and smiled gently. This courtroom has seen many cases, she said, but this is one I will never forget. She paused, then added, this case is now closed, but your story is just beginning. Outside the courthouse, the boy and his mother walked side by side into the sunlight. The city noise surrounded them, but inside, there was only silence. The kind of silence that comes when the weight you've carried for years is finally lifted. They didn't speak much. There was no need. Every step they took together now was filled with meaning. Every glance, every smile, every breath was a sign of something new. A connection that could finally grow. The mother stopped for a second and turned to him. Do you like ice cream? She asked, half laughing through her tears. He looked at her and smiled. I've never had it with my mom before. She reached out, brushing his hair back gently, like she had always wanted to. Then let's start now. They walked down the street together, mother and son, beginning a new chapter. It wouldn't be perfect. Healing takes time. Trust takes time. But now they had something they didn't before, each other. And sometimes, that's all you need to begin again. The case had ended, but for the boy and his mother, their real journey was just beginning. As they walked away from the courthouse side by side, the world outside felt different. Not because anything had changed around them. Cars still rushed past, people still hurried down the sidewalks, but because something inside them had changed. A truth once buried had come to light. A bond once broken had been found again. But now came the hardest part of all, learning how to live with this new reality. Later that week, the boy sat at the edge of his bed in the small foster home he had known for years. The room was plain, white walls, a wooden desk, a single window with an old curtain. It wasn't much, but it had been his space, his comfort zone, even when nothing else in life made sense. Now, everything had changed. He looked down at the photo in his hand, an old, slightly blurry picture the lawyer had given him. It was a photo of his mother holding him as a baby. She looked young, hopeful, full of dreams. His tiny body was wrapped in a blue blanket, his head resting against her chest. For the first time, the photo felt real. She wasn't just someone in the picture anymore. She was real, and she was here. His phone buzzed. It was a message. Mom, I know you're probably scared. I am too. But I want to see you. No pressure. Just lunch, okay? The boy stared at the message for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. Then, slowly, he typed back. Me? Okay. I'd like that. The first lunch. They met at a quiet cafe just outside the city. It wasn't fancy, just a small place with checkered tablecloths and warm, simple food. The kind of place that made people feel safe. She arrived early. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited, unsure if he would actually come. But then, through the window, she saw him walking toward the door, nervous, hands in his pockets, but there. When he stepped inside, their eyes met. Hi, she said softly, standing up. Hi, he replied, just as quietly. They sat. At first, the conversation was awkward. Neither knew where to begin. What do you say to someone who shares your blood but not your memories? What words could ever fill 16 years of silence? But slowly, as the food arrived, the walls began to fall. She asked him about school, what he liked to read, what music he listened to. He told her about growing up in foster care, the different homes he had lived in, the people who had come and gone. And then she told him about her life. The pain, the loneliness, the silent grief of believing her baby had died. She told him about the dreams she used to have of a baby crying, and how she'd wake up wondering if she was imagining it or remembering something real. I used to talk to you, she said, her voice trembling. Even when I thought you were gone, I talked to the stars, thinking maybe you could hear me. He looked at her, quietly absorbing every word. "I think I did," he said softly. Their eyes met again, not as strangers, not even just as mother and son, but as two souls who had wandered through pain and found their way back to each other. Weeks later, the boy had moved out of the foster home. His mother had offered him a room in her apartment, not to pressure him, but to give him a place where he could feel safe. At first, he wasn't sure. He had learned to depend only on himself. But eventually, he said yes. She gave him the bigger room. She filled it with books and music he liked. She bought new bedsheets, blue, his favorite color. On the wall, she hung a framed version of that old photo. They started doing small things together, cooking dinner, watching movies, grocery shopping. At first, it felt strange, like they were acting out the parts of a family that didn't quite exist yet. But over time, it began to feel natural. One evening after dinner, the boy said something that made her heart stop. "Can I call you Mom?" Tears filled her eyes. She reached out and held his hand. "Only if it feels right to you," she said. "It does," he whispered. Months later, they were walking through a park together on a sunny day, laughing, sharing stories. People passed by without knowing what these two had gone through. To everyone else, they looked like any other mother and teenage son, but their story was something far deeper than anyone could imagine. It was a story of loss, but also of rediscovery, of a love that had been hidden, not gone. A connection broken by fate, but repaired by truth. The boy had begun therapy to help him process everything. His mother went with him to some sessions. They both cried. They both healed. She wasn't perfect. Neither was he. But they were trying. Together. One day, he found an old notebook in a drawer. Inside, his mother had written letters to the son she believed she had lost. Birthday messages, poems, dreams. He read them one by one, tears falling onto the pages. And for the first time, he realized, he had always been loved, even in silence. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light across the city park. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and soft purple, like a gentle goodbye from the day. Birds chirped quietly in the trees, and a light breeze rustled the leaves above. The boy and his mother walked side by side along a quiet path, surrounded by trees on both sides. It had been a few months since the courtroom, since the truth came out, since tears turned into healing, and silence turned into conversation. Their steps were slow, calm, no rush, no pressure, just peace. She looked at him from the corner of her eye. His face had changed since that day in court. He looked lighter now, less guarded, more open. Still quiet, still thoughtful. But something was different. He smiled more. He spoke more. He was starting to trust life again. "You always liked sunsets?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, it feels like the world slows down. Like everything finally makes sense, even if it's just for a few minutes." She smiled. "I used to watch sunsets alone. I'd always imagine what it would be like if you were still with me." He glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "And now?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Now, I don't have to imagine anymore." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, watching the sky burn with color, the sun dipping lower behind the trees. It was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It was quiet. It was healing. She slowly reached into her bag and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, worn, and a little torn at the edges. "I want you to have this," she said, handing it to him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter, written in her handwriting. "Dear my son, if you are ever out there, and if somehow, by some miracle, you read this one day, I want you to know something simple. I never stopped loving you. Not when they said you were gone. Not when I was alone. Not when the world was silent. I carried you in my heart every day. You were my reason to keep going, even when I had nothing left. I don't know if we'll ever meet again. But if we do, I hope you'll forgive me. And I hope you'll know I never gave up on you. Not once. Mom. His eyes filled with tears, the kind that didn't fall fast, but slowly built up until the whole world blurred. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. They continued walking, side by side, their shadows stretching behind them as the light began to fade. The silence between them now wasn't awkward or painful. It was warm. It was full. Before they reached the park bench at the end of the path, he stopped and looked at her. "Hey," he said, "I know we missed a lot of time, but we still have time now, right?" She smiled through watery eyes, nodding. "Yes, and I'm not going anywhere." He held out his hand. She took it, fingers gently curling into his. And together, mother and son, they sat down on the bench, watching the last bit of sunlight dip below the horizon. No more secrets, no more silence, just love, pure, quiet, and finally free. As the screen faded to black, one final message appeared.